I'm Roger Grimsby. Behind me, the bridge of no return. Beyond that, North Korea. This is Panmunjom. On June 25th, 25 years ago, there began what was called a police action, what was in fact the Korean War. The Korean War was distinguished by being the first major military adventure involving the United Nations, and also the last major military adventure of the United States involving the M1 rifle, the M1 and M2 carbine, and the water-cooled .30. It was also distinguished by the fact that the Greeks and the Turks were on the same side. It was a costly war. 103,284 Americans were wounded in action. 33,629 were killed in combat. But if you add on those who froze to death, who died in captivity, or from accidents, 54,246 Americans died in Korea. The cost in money? In 1965 dollars, about $18 billion. This program will attempt to assess what we bought with that action. An effort at containment. Containment, a pill that was swallowed in Indochina. But this is Korea, a land called the land of the morning calm. The question, how long will the morning calm last? Coming back to South Korea for the first time since 1951 does jog the memory. As a member of Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Regiment, 1st Cavalry Division, I was lucky. I did not serve in the winter and for only 3 months, August, September, and October, as a rifleman and a 60mm mortarman. I was also lucky as between the 3rd of October and the 5th, the 2nd Battalion was reduced from over 600 men to 60. Those days live largest in my mind. It happened not on a fancy name like Heartbreak Ridge or Old Baldy. It happened on Hill 418. I wanted to see that hill again on this trip. However, it's 17 miles north of the DMZ. I feel no bitterness about giving it back after paying that price, but then, like I said, I was lucky. There are certain memories this trip has moved onto the backyard of my mind. GI boots sticking out from beneath ponchos the morning after, waiting for the Graves registration people, lifting the poncho to see if you knew the owner of the boots, wondering whatever happened when a wounded acquaintance leaves and never returns. Did he die, or was he crippled, or was it one of those $1 million wounds? The sound of the spoon popping off a grenade, the angry whine and buzz of grenade fragments, you never hear it in the movies. A hill covered with letters and personal effects after a battle. The earth churned to dust by the artillery that preceded you up the slope. The bugles and the undeleted expletives that preceded them up the slope. The smiles on the faces of most of the wounded as they know they're getting out of there at least for a while. And of course, the fear that never quite leaves even when it's quiet. The incredible noise of Corps artillery firing time on target. 200 guns firing in sequence so all the shells arrive at once. The growing roar of their arrival stops breathing, and you wonder how the enemy can survive. And he does. And there are others who remember. I found a man who used to be a company commander of Fox Company in the 7th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division. That was my company. But he was wounded before I got there.
I was wounded near the small town of Waegwan in south-central Korea and evacuated the United States.
Well, now looking at the Army then and comparing it with the Army today, the United States Army, what differences do you see?
I think the United States Army today is a much higher state of readiness. In 1950, of course, the World War II inactivations had taken place. We were down in people, down in equipment, down in training. I do not find that true today. Particularly after Vietnam and the steps that have been taken, we find a highly disciplined Army, well-equipped, well-manned, and well-trained.
What is our military presence in numbers here in South Korea?
We have about 40,000 U.S. forces, ground, sea, and air, stationed in Korea today.
How is that broken down?
The great majority, about 30,000 of them, are United States Army, and the rest, the great majority, is Air Force with a very small naval component.
What is your impression and assessment of the state of readiness of the South Korean military?
Well, that's a good question because I work almost daily with the ROK Army. ROK Army is a very professional organization. They've gone to our schools, many of them. They put many thousands of troops fighting in Vietnam and gained combat experience. They know tactics. They know supply economy. They know how to shoot. They have some shortages in modern equipment, which they, as well as we, are working to overcome. But the ROK Army is a tough army, a disciplined army, and it will fight and fight well. ROK Air Force, same. Very qualified pilots. As a matter of fact, they compete on very equal terms, United States Air Force pilots. Again, their aircraft are not as modern and is not as numerous as we would like them to be. ROK Navy, same thing. And the ROK Marine Corps, tough ROK Marines. ROK Navy needs more capital ships. It needs improvements in equipment, but they are very, very competent. Overall, the ROK forces are very professional.
The South Korean Air Force is not up to the standards of the North Korean Air Force and is the cause of considerable concern. Chung-Hoon Park, a Major General, retired Korean Air Force, President of the Korean Traders Association.
Our air power is weaker. So before we build up our air power and considering the importance of air power in the modern world, conventional modern war, I think it is hard to predict that we can win.
I think you have to look at the threat that faces them, and this is the North Korean threat. And it is very true that the North Koreans have a very good assemblage of modern aircraft and in far greater numbers than the South Koreans alone. We do have United States Air Force aircraft in country, and we would compete very favorably with the North Koreans if that came about. They do need more modern aircraft in greater numbers in South Korea.
The threat from the North is a clear and present danger in the minds of the South. Headlines in the local press as evidence. Perhaps the best evidence, the tunnels that have been dug from north to south beneath the DMZ. Our trip to Tunnel 2 took us into the DMZ. I wondered at the time why they insisted I wear a helmet liner. The white flag on the Jeep was obvious. There was a briefing at the entrance. Booby traps left behind by the North Koreans are still a cause of concern. 8 ROK troops have been killed. Then into the tunnel, dug by the South to intercept the one dug by the North. Around the bend, and we're in the North Korean tube, where I learned why they had me wear the helmet liner. Over 2 miles long, through solid granite. One other tunnel has been found. A dozen or more are believed to have been at least started by the North, none of which is indicative of a relaxing of tensions. I asked Major General William Webb, Chief U.S. Representative at Panmunjom, what happened when the tunnel question came up.
They have consistently denied that the tunnels exist, although faced with about as strong documentary proof as you could give them in the form of photographs, in the form of films and videotapes that shows the inside of the tunnels. Large amount of very reputable testimony. We have invited them to enter the tunnels and view them. Their standard answer is if what you're talking about calling tunnels does not exist, and if there were any, the South Koreans must have dug them. They consistently refuse to admit their presence.
The armistice talks continue here at Panmunjom, and according to those who attend, they're something less than cordial.
I must say that the bellicose statements, the threats, the half-truths, the failure to admit wrongs, the false charges, are a pattern that have made up these talks for many years. Well, I must say that there's a very senior North Korean general sitting opposite me and some senior North Korean colonels and a Chinese comrade There is no sign of recognition. There's no military courtesy. There are no handshakes. As a matter of fact, there is derogatory language. The press members from the other side stand outside and shout obscenities at the very senior Republic of Korea representatives, threaten their lives and things of this nature. It's certainly not an air of two sides that are upholding an armistice, that are seeking a common end.
Defense against a violent visit from the North is not South Korea's only problem, as we'll learn when we continue. In 1971, at the instigation of the South Korean Red Cross, talks were begun with the North on the question of exchanging displaced persons. Those talks were then expanded to include political questions, and thus the South-North Coordinating Committee was formed. As a member of the committee, Dong-Bok Lee made 2 trips to Pyongyang before the exchanges were stopped.
We have had the impression that while we try to deal with this inter-Korean dialogue as a reciprocal business, the other side of Korea try to deal with it as an instrument to pursue their purpose of pursuing what they call a South Korean revolution. In other words,
They were using it for propaganda?
Oh, yes, exactly. But they felt that the dialogue was not serving their purpose in the first place, and in the second place, they came to conclude that the mere continuation of the dialogue was contributing to an institutionalization of a peaceful coexistence between the two sides of Korea, which turned out to be not in their favor.
Do you see any hope of reunification of the two Koreas through negotiation?
Well, it's very difficult to answer that question because our view regarding unification is not one that is based on rational calculation. In other words, it's not that we say to ourselves negotiation or reunification is possible within 5 years, therefore we want it. On the contrary, even if we think the prospects are very dim, and sometimes we are somewhat pessimistic, but nevertheless, this is a goal, this is a destiny we cannot give up. We are totally and unalterably committed to the goal of national unification because we are a one nation. There are 2 approaches to reunification, one through war, the other alternative is through negotiation. We reject war. We reject military means as an acceptable policy completely. So negotiation is the only other alternative, even if it's very difficult to achieve. That is why we have tried negotiation with North Koreans earlier, a few years back. But as you know, the record has not been promising.
Do you see any possible success in reunification of the two Koreas by negotiation?
Not much chance at the moment. I doubt very much if, in fact, I don't believe our people will want to give up our form of government, our way of life, our social system, simply for the sake of reunification, because that will mean coming under the communist dictatorship. I doubt very much the North Koreans will change their form of government in the near future. But as I say, history does change. All societies change.
President Nixon pointed with pride, saying Korea is a model of what other nations can do. A 10% annual growth rate. Morgan Guaranty Trust called that growth rate remarkable. There are reasons. Korean investment laws permit 100% foreign ownership with a guarantee against nationalization. They offer a 5-year moratorium on taxes. Strikes against foreign companies are prohibited. The labor is cheap, 1/12 of the U.S. There is no minimum wage, and the average manufacturing wage is $50 a month. Textiles are Korea's largest export. 1/3 of Korea's GNP is intended for export. And there is a problem.